Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Hello to everyone watching this podcast. Thank you for joining us. This is the third podcast in the series of Small Business Chronicles, which is a name that was voted for by the residents of Toddington Village in central Bedfordshire in the United Kingdom. They were really supportive in getting this podcast off the ground. So, thanks to them for that, and thanks for all the support so far. The viewership is going up for both previous episodes, where we had two local central Bedfordshireans, if I can call them that. Today we're being joined by a fellow country person. As most of you know, I'm South African, and we're being joined by Helen Will, who is in South Africa as we speak, and she's in the HR profession. It's a profession that I've been afraid of for many years, and I've worked with many HR people over the last 35 years. So please join me in welcoming Helen today. She's going to give us an insight into the world of HR, and she's going to give us some useful information and probably some perspectives that we haven't seen because we usually look at it from one side of the table. So, Helen, thank you for joining me and welcome. Over to you. If you can, just give us a rundown on what it's like to be in the HR profession, where you started, where you are today. It's a free conversation, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, my career started actually in finance many years ago. And when I held the position of assistant accountant while I was working for some consulting engineers, they offered me the opportunity to cross-train into HR. And that's where my HR journey began. Because we were both eager, the company and myself, to get this going quickly. And my children, I have twins, were very young at the time. I did a short course, 6 months. And when I finished the course, I was ready to take on the challenge of setting up the HR department for the employer. Very excited about that. And at least the course had given me a good, solid understanding of the HR laws, recruitment, certain procedures around certain activities in HR. And yes, I hit the ground running with that. And once that happened, the timing of that was actually pretty good. And at that time when that took place, the laws within the labor landscape of South Africa had changed completely. So old personnel management was being put away, and the new HR management was coming afore. And three pieces of legislation became crucial, and they remain crucial in the HR world in South Africa today. And those are the Labour Relations Act, the Employment Equity Act, and the Skills Development Act. So the timing of my transition into HR at that time was perfect, because I didn't need to unlearn the old personnel management ways. And at least I then had a good grounding in the new rules and how things should be done. And I could set up the HR department accordingly. And then from there, I remained with that organization for almost 10 years. And when I left, I'd set up the departments and grown it to 3 people. So we had a person that I trained in payroll. Payroll was part of my function as well. I love figures as well. And so I trained her, and she took over payroll from me. And then I had an HR officer who took a lot of the skills development initiatives and projects from me. And then I was HR manager. And then at a point in time, I wanted to take a career break, which might sound a little bit strange to the viewers, but I had a dream to be a wedding coordinator for a long, long time. And I decided to step out and explore that dream. And so I went ahead, found a lady who is a web designer. She put together a beautiful website for me, and it showcased the best of what we had to offer in the region where I live. And yes, obviously that is how clients were going to reach me, through the website. And I was fortunate that I attracted overseas clients, brides from UK and Ireland mainly. And so they would connect with me via email. and that was about one of the only technologies we had available at that time. You didn't have WhatsApp, you didn't have Teams, you didn't have Zoom, so you had none of this visual technology. It was either telephone, fax, or email. So we would exchange information, they would share their dream for the day, and it was up to me to receive the funds from them and pay over to the various vendors, secure the vendors for the particular day of their wedding, and just stay in touch over that period, which could be anything from 6 months to a year, to secure this. So that
Sorry, Helen, can I just
yes,
ask you a question there?
of course.
Wedding and events planning is an absolute minefield because, sometimes sometimes I struggle, as you know, just to organize a meeting. The calendar goes crazy, or I mess something up, or I don't get the timing right, or something. Now, having come from
Yes.
what I was saying, what was the last thing you heard me say?
That it's challenging. You experience challenges with even doing a regular meeting and setting up a calendar,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
where I was lost.
Okay. Okay, so what I was saying is, what kind of skills did you bring from, from your previous finance work and your HR work into this wedding planning kind of thing? Because, it's two completely different things, but there will be synergies there. Can you tell me some of that?
Yes, absolutely. Well, HR, you're dealing with people. And once again, planning a wedding, you're dealing with people. So the people skills and communicating and customer service, I would say, dealing with people in an organization or dealing with your bride, is the same. So that transition was quite easy for me. Um, with a fairly strong finance background, obviously dealing with money, understanding the trust that was invested in me by someone, that doesn't know me at all and
Mm,
forwards money to me. My integrity is super important to me. So integrity is what I used in order to manage their funds and ensure everything was correct for the day. And obviously, the day itself is where, the magic happened and the person could see what I had delivered once they were here and could see the actual, delivery of all the different services that had been put together. So, yes, the weddings are more challenging in terms of time deadlines. I was the only person responsible. I had no one else to delegate to. So it fell back to me. So my time management and prioritization of tasks had to be crucial. And I really had to keep on top of things in order to ensure that even if there was a bit of a drop somewhere, something couldn't happen, or a florist for some reason couldn't
mm,
find the type of flower that a bride wanted, I had to manage that no matter how short the period of time. Because at the end of the day, it was about customer service and ensuring that they
yeah,
had the best day possible, because that's what they're paying you to do.
yeah, yeah. That's true. It's one of the things that I think there's many businesses out there that need to pay a bit more attention to that in terms of customer services. What it means to not just in terms of giving them the service, providing the service, selling the product, but it's the aftercare sales that go on as well. And just looking out for giving the customer the value that they're looking for, as opposed to just selling them a service or goods. Now, you mentioned a transition from the old style of personnel management, which I remember when I started my apprenticeship in the late 80s. That's what it was called. You went to the personnel department, and then it became human resources. Now, there's a very contentious name that gets banded around about human resources, and people refer to human resources HR as certainly people that I've known over the years. Sometimes HR is called human remains and not human resources. Now that's based on people's perception. Why would you think? First of all, why would anyone have that perception of HR, and what should their perception be?
Right. I think one of the top reasons why people feel that is they've obviously had an experience with an HR department that probably doesn't maybe have the best people skills in the way they handle things. And they've given the impression to the staff that they're there and they only have the interests of the company at heart and not the employee. Because a true HR person is juggling two hats. You are looking after the care of your staff as well as the organization at the same time. It's a juggling act. It's very difficult and it takes years and years to master. So, yes, I would believe it's because the people gave the impression to the people who believe that they're only there for the interests of the company and they have no interest in the staff themselves.
I can see what you mean by that because someone said to me once when I first went into management role, I came off the shop floor, went into deputy team leader position, became a team leader, and then moved up the ranks. And I found it very difficult for a long time as a deputy team leader, especially because that's like sitting on the fence because sometimes you're on the shop floor, sometimes you're behind the desk. And one of my mentors said to me, look, if you try and walk on both sides in the middle of the road, you're going to get hit by traffic on both sides. You need to pick a side and stay on that side. So if you're not going to be a leader, then you need to stay on the shop floor. And if you're going to be a leader, then you need to step into the leadership position and be a leader that way. Now, he had good intentions with that, bearing in mind he's old school. How do you manage the juggling two hats? Because that's like walking in the middle of the road, from my perception. How do you manage that? What tips do you have for people that are, more or less senior than you are in the HR field? What tips do you have for them to bring them some success in their journey?
I would say it depends on the situation. So there were times when I had to perhaps wear the company hat a little bit more. And there were times when I needed to wear the employee hat a little bit more. So it depended on the situation. I'm trying to think of some examples for you. Look, let's just take a simple thing. You're sitting as HR manager in your office and the
Yeah.
phone can ring and suddenly there's information that something has happened to an employee. So it doesn't have to be a physical injury, but it could be something
Mhm.
they've lost their husband or
Mhm.
there's been some tragedy in their life. So obviously in a situation like that, it's very easy to be far more partial and see the situation from an employee's perspective, to call them in, have a chat, and that connection is right there. And then it's a matter of feeding back to, say, the CEO or at your next management meeting. You wouldn't divulge all the confidentiality of the issue, but you would report back to management. So at least they were aware of what had happened in terms of maybe why the person is no longer at work or they're absent and maybe their manager didn't have details. It was an urgent issue and HR manager just had to, get involved and handle. So, yes, that's one example. There maybe retrenchment. That's a completely different
Mhm.
example altogether. The company is in a situation for operational reasons why they need to reduce staff. It's such a difficult road for HR to walk. Well, quite frankly, for any of the management to walk, it's not an easy
Yeah.
road. So personally, when I did do those, I found it very challenging. But if I was dealing with the employee themselves and they had questions around why they didn't understand the process, I would just make sure that I gave them my attention in that moment and try and help them to understand why it
Yeah.
was necessary and that it wasn't personal, that they weren't being singled out.
Yeah.
It was a job role, that was changing
Yeah.
in terms of business needs.
Yeah.
And then from the company perspective, you need to go into that role. And that's where it's about what the law says and what you need to follow procedurally and your
Yeah.
reasons about things. Can you justify it if you questioned? So,
Yeah.
yes, very, very difficult to walk both sides of the fence. I believe after all the years that I've done it, I don't believe that we can make a choice as HR, because each day is so different and each situation is different and your people are different. No
Yeah.
person is the same. So you can have similar situations, but each of those, the HR person will respond in a way based on the circumstances in that moment and the people they're dealing with. And I think that's just the general guide.
Yeah, yeah, that was a bit of a difficult question there because it's like anything. I think anything that involves having to, deal with people on an empathetic level, and as human beings, because the bottom line is people that are working for someone. Some companies, and some leaders have a view that this is why even the term human resources refers to people in working in an organization as resources,
Mm.
and that's a technical name. It sometimes comes across the wrong way to people that are working there because it makes them feel like they are just resources and not people, like a piece of equipment that needs to be used to produce something. Now, that is the way it is, and I can't see anyone changing that name just because we've done this podcast. But it must be a difficult road as an HR person to manage that empathy side of things, because you are dealing with people, and you've expressed it really nicely and explained it in a beautiful way that there is a level of care and attention that has to be paid to people that are going through difficult situations, and it's always going to be difficult to balance that when you have to satisfy the legal requirements of things as well. Um, would you say that there's room for what kind of departments do you have within the HR department? Let's start with that. That's a big department. Are there, what kind of subdivisions are there in HR?
Right. You generally have sort of a more administrative role for
Yeah.
junior person coming in. So there'll be an administrative function looking after records, taking calls, assisting and trying to grow from more senior people within the department. Payroll. Payroll is traditionally put in with HR. That can be debated. Is it really a finance function or is it HR? But I don't think that's the purpose of our discussion today. So, but I had it as part of my portfolio.
Yeah.
So, payroll, and that really is a big portfolio as well, because you've got a lot of um, legal requirements in terms of that, reporting
Yeah.
to SARS and different departments with different information on staff. So it's very legalized, and you have to be very careful of what you do and how you keep the records. So that would be. Then you could have, say, an HR officer role, which is more sort of middle of the road. And this individual would be more senior to the administrative one. They've walked that road already, and they wanting
Right.
to expand their experience. And they could be someone who's would take on the skills development function. So maybe employment equity, because the two of them really dovetail. So when you're
Yeah.
doing employment equity activities once a year and you report to Department of Labor, there's an element of skills development that flows into that process. So you could have someone that is looking after what we call the workplace skills plan and the
Yeah.
training plan that needs to be reported on once a year to a CETA, which is a government facility that actually is broken down per industry in South Africa, and organizations join a CETA depending on the industry they're in. And then they pay skills levies over to this particular CETA, and the training initiatives of the organization are channeled through this process. So I'm trying not to give too much detail.
No,
So
no, that's
yes,
fine. Um, it's good because it'll give the viewer a good picture of what HR is about. And
okay.
even though I've worked with HR people for about 35 years now, I'm still learning things, and I see different things, different aspects. And you've touched on one of the most important ones, which I think is key for the viewer to understand, is that HR people actually are there to support employees as well. And the difficulty is not just supporting employees and giving them genuine help and guidance, but also to make sure that employees follow the correct legal procedure. So I think it's valuable. There's no limit to the amount of information you can give, Helen. The floor is yours.
Right. So with the employment equity side, both of those, the skills development and the employment equity side, have a strong what shall we call it? It's a process once a year where the organizations need to report back to a body outside of the company. This deadline is imposed upon HR and it cannot be changed. It's a fixed deadline. So the people who work in the roles of employment equity or skills within a company need to know about this deadline and use and access the system in the third parties' computer systems and know how they work, which is different to their own organization. But there's a lot of work that goes into training the staff, planning your training for the next year, and then you need to report on what you've done in terms of the plan that you provided the year prior. So it's a very labor-intensive process doing that.
Yeah.
And then, as I say, employment equity is perhaps attending employment equity meetings, which happen, I'd say, quarterly in most companies. It's about discrimination and ensuring that the company isn't discriminating. Yes, it has a strong race bias. You are looking at records that show what the structure and the makeup of the geographical makeup of the South African population is, the working population, and then companies need to compare themselves, how they look in terms of a profile in relation to the national one. And where they are short,
that's sorry,
they
Helen.
need to plug the holes.
That's an interesting one because if I understand what you're saying, there must be. Please correct me if I'm wrong. There are guidelines in terms of how employment should be carried out. So that it's representative of the general populace or demographic of an area. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And it starts with your recruitment process. So your
Okay.
recruitment strategy should already have some impact of what the company looks like in relation to the national mirror, if I can call it that.
Right.
So you do a comparison, and where there are shortfalls, the intention is to plug those holes. So that becomes a part of your EE strategy within the
Okay.
organization to say, we are really short in this area and we need to improve that. Then you
Yeah.
make suggestions and strategies on how you're going to do that. And that's usually a 5-year plan that would apply in most companies. So it's coming
So
back to your original
there's going to
question.
be. So sorry. I am going to go into a different question. I've still got that on the back burner. Just one more
Okay.
short question on that one. Um, in terms of fairness and transparency, when I say fairness and transparency, I'm thinking, by on layman's terms here, somebody who's qualified to do the job. In my eyes, I'm not getting into a legal argument with labor laws and stuff, but in my mind, if someone is qualified to do the job and they are a good fit for the job, because sometimes you get people that are highly skilled at something, but they're just not going to fit into that organizational ethos, then as far as I'm concerned, if someone is the right fit and has the right competencies, it doesn't matter what part of the demographic they come from or anything like that. For me, it's got nothing to do with race, color, creed, religious denomination, or whatever the case is. I'll give them the job. Is there a conflict between that and the way the laws actually stand? Now, I'm not talking about South Africa in particular. I'm just talking in general because I know you do work with across borders. How is there a conflict there?
I imagine there can be. It's a difficult one to answer because the whole philosophy behind our EE Act is transformation.
Yeah,
So, I'm not sure how else to answer that than it would
yeah,
be difficult. It depends on where you are as an organization. I
yeah,
don't think EE would really make sense to any other country outside of South Africa because it was uniquely designed
yeah,
and born out of our situation at a particular point in time.
yeah, yeah,
So it's about
yeah. So
transforming
it's like
South
a,
Africa workplaces.
yeah. Yeah, that's a fair point. It's a transformational activity, and then after transformational activity takes place, then sometimes there's a leveling up opportunity, because the whole idea is for everyone to thrive in a place, and everyone to be united and work together and work towards a common goal. And I suppose, there's phases to getting there. It's not just something that happens from point A and suddenly you end up at Z. You've got to go through
Exactly.
B, C, D, and everything else. And what you've described to me sounds like that's part of the phase of getting there.
Yes.
I'll let you carry on, Helen. Forgive my interruption.
No, that's absolutely fine. So, coming back to sort of that would be a middle of the road type function for an HR person within HR. And I'm speaking really from my experience, which has been medium sized companies, anything from about 120 to 220 employees at a time. So a lot of the time you just have three people. You could just have your payroll admin type person, you would have your HR officer, and then you have an HR manager. Sometimes beyond that, if the organization's a bit bigger, you'd have your HR director. So that person obviously is maybe not as actively involved in the day-to-day functioning, but the HR manager would report to them and maybe once a year would assist them in put together a report so that when there's a strategic management session or directors need to get together, the HR manager can support that director in providing an update on HR activities and just, provide the report for general management structure to understand what's happening.
So you've got all this experience in terms of working in different places and people, for people. Tell the viewers about your own business and what you are, what you offer to people.
Right. So, yes, I'm founder of People Solutions, which is an HR consultancy here in Durban, South Africa. And my clients are SMEs or SMMEs. So I target these clients because I believe so strongly in a solid HR foundation. So it's about assisting them in setting up an HR department for the first time, or if they're not at that level and they just want assistance in understanding the basics to reduce their risk and exposure to risk from a legal perspective, then that's what I do. I support them in doing that, in analyzing, coming in, doing an HR audit, seeing what is in place, what isn't in place, and plugging the holes from there.
Yeah, it can be quite. I mean, I'm a small business myself, and thankfully, um, the only HR Elaine has to deal with is me. So it's quite easy for people like us, where it's just two of us running a business. But I can imagine for other small businesses that are bigger than us, that have a lot more employees, there are going to be areas where they're not sure of what to do, and that's where the challenge comes in. How would you be able to plug that for them? Do they contact you? I know you've got a website which will be on the screen later. um, is there anything you'd like to say to them in terms of contact and what services you can offer them? I know you've got touched on some of them now. I'm thinking more along the lines of UK based companies, small companies that are over here.
Right. Well, yes, I've spent a couple of years in the UK as an HR coordinator within the care sector. And that took place right at COVID. So the timing of that wasn't ideal. But nonetheless, it was a challenging time. And I think HR, personally, I was involved in, having to speak to carers. The company I worked for at the time offered assistance to residents who needed 24/7 care. And we suddenly
Yes.
had this huge care group that were really afraid of what was happening, didn't know what was going on, and everyone was unsure of what to do. We had no guidelines. We had no Google to go and type in and get assistance. We had no one to call. We had to figure it out. And we managed to get through that as an HR team. And so, yes, that taught us resilience, perseverance. And because we were in the care sector, which was regarded as essential services, we continued to work. So there was no furlough or stepping out and not working at that time. We continued to work. So yes, in terms of, I currently am still involved in UK case investigations, which I find very, very interesting. It can be rather intense, and I do enjoy it. So it's all about doing the investigation of where something's gone wrong. A transgression has been breached somewhere,
Yeah.
some rule or standard, and it's a matter of interviewing the people involved, and then at the end of it, putting together an investigation report and making recommendations on the outcome of each of the allegations. So
Okay. So things like sounds like what you can help with are things like navigating policy for for small businesses, SMEs. What about employee handbooks and stuff like that? Because I know in some places that I've worked with or worked at, there are employee handbooks. There's a handbook for managers and various different things. Is that something you also get involved with?
yes, absolutely. I think a handbook is absolutely crucial, particularly for the employee, because a new employee comes into an organization and they really know nothing. And if the onboarding process isn't very sound and detailed, that
Mm.
individual might not know, who do I go to get a leave application? How do I complete it? Who do I submit the form to? So it's really simple things, and your employee handbook should provide every type of event that an employee could face and how
Yeah,
they can handle it. Particularly if HR is not around, it might be something they want to find out after hours. So if they've
yeah,
got the handbook, they've got some reference tool to go to, read up on the issue, and they've got their answers. And if
yeah.
that's not informative enough, obviously they can refer to HR. So yes, absolutely. When I was in the UK, I did assist with doing drafts towards an update on the HR handbook. So yes, I'm
Yeah.
pretty certain that that's something I can assist with.
There's a vast field you cover there because, having worked in HR in the UK and in South Africa, um, I'm guessing there's going to be quite a lot of differences there in terms of, policies, how they're structured. You mentioned one earlier on, which would be different in some countries, in terms of demographics and population and all that sort of stuff. That must be quite a challenge. So you've got a wide sort of market that you can cater for. For your market in South Africa, what can you give them that they don't know about yet? How can you promote your services to them?
Right. Well, I would think the website that is about to launch within a week or two would give a lot of information to a person keen to work with me and needing assistance. I provide all the details there. As I say, yes, it's from setting up your HR department, from providing just general HR assistance if you need to call. I've got the situation, what do I do? Putting together an employee handbook, line managers, assisting with
Yeah,
helping line managers at their level. I found that such a crucial role, when I worked in HR actively, is helping a line manager
yeah,
to understand their role and that they actually manage their staff, not HR.
yeah,
So we're
yeah,
there as a support. And I really enjoyed that function. So that's something else I feel I can really offer value, is helping line managers to know what their role is, and how HR supports them in
Yeah.
managing their staff.
Yeah, I think there's a gap because I worked in production for many years, managing production activities and things like that. And because our passion is engineering, for those of us who manage production focuses, operations, we know enough about production to manage it. And then something happens in terms of an employee's behavior or something that goes on with them. And sometimes, with the best will in the world, we make mistakes which contravene policy. Like, for example, somebody comes to work, something's gone wrong at home, something confidential. They found it really hard to come to me and talk to me about it in the first place. And then I said, look, okay, take 3 days off and call me after 3 days and let me know. And you might get a phone call from HR or time and attendance saying, what's going on with this guy? Why is he not in? And you say, well,
Mm.
I've given him 3 days off. Why? Well, there's a confidential thing that's going on. Yeah, but under those circumstances, we only offer 1 day. Why have you done 3 days? So it's things like that where I think sometimes when people are promoted from one position to another, um, they're told where the HR policies are, but the reality is it's a whole different field on its own. It's not something you can just go to on the day and read it, because it takes some understanding. Sometimes the way it's written is not in a way an engineer would read it or understand it. So I totally agree with you. I think in terms of line manager training, some companies might do well to include an HR module. When they promote someone from one position to another, it doesn't have to give them a degree in it or anything like that, but just introduce them to the module, give them an overview, give them, the main sort of points that they need to be aware of under the most common circumstances, and that might be helpful.
I totally agree with you. Absolutely. That does happen so often. You have the transition, which goes a little bit further, I think, than what you've just touched on. Somebody could get promoted. They were perhaps a
Mhm.
supervisor in a particular team. Now they
Yeah,
become the manager of that team. And,
yeah,
the demands on their time and attending meetings now. So they've got a lot more on their plate to
yeah.
handle. And as you say, suddenly they're thrust into the situation of,
Mm.
how do I handle it? And their first go-to response might not be, well, let me try HR, to get some advice. So, and in which it could then land them in a little bit of hot water. But you're quite right. They don't have time to sit and read a policy and procedure manual in order to
Yeah,
answer a question that a staff
yeah.
member has conveyed to them. So it's very important that HR always has that relationship with line management. It's crucial. I felt I did that pretty effectively, and it's because I could see that gap when someone is
Yeah,
promoted. The other point I wanted to raise is, if they were supervisor, they kind of part of the team, and
yeah,
they're not really in charge, partially in charge if the manager steps out, but suddenly now they're a manager. It's a different
yeah,
role. So their
yeah.
colleagues were maybe friends that they might have socialized with after hours,
Correct.
and suddenly now they the manager, and you can't really be friends,
No,
in that situation. It's going to get you into hot water. So that transition, I think HR can help with a lot, to get a
that's
supervisor to understand the jump from their role
yeah.
up to management. Yes.
Moving from team member to team leader and team leader
Yes.
to manager. It's all it's all usually based on competency. He's a good engineer, so he'll be a good team leader, and that doesn't always follow, because apart from that, there's a management level of skills you need to learn, and you also need to learn quite a lot of HR. I've put myself on the wrong side of the line a few times in my various different transitions, because I think like an engineer or think like a manager, but I don't think with an HR hat on. And I learned very quickly to do that, because if you don't, you end up in find yourself in hot water every so often, and I'm no stranger to that. There's other things like how HR can be part of things like union negotiations, and because obviously you've got your employees and you've got management and you've got the union in there. So HR is a critical function of that. What kind of advice would you have to managers, especially when dealing with those kind of negotiations from an HR perspective?
Right. Firstly, I think you've got to remember, and this is what I needed to learn when I started dealing with union reps for the first time. I was petrified to do it because I hadn't had experience at that particular point in time.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, how am I going to handle this? And the first thing you learn is they're just humans like anyone else. And if you sit down with them, first listen to what they have to say. Don't, and show that you're friendly and that you're willing to listen. And I think if you can start off the original conversation in a calm manner, no matter what the
Yeah.
subject is, you're
Yeah.
going to have far more success than coming in with sort of all barrels going, about a particular topic, whether it's wage negotiation or, the time off or, working on public holidays, no matter what the issue is. I think just my advice would be first listen to what they have to say. And because I applied that, I found it worked for me. And in the end, my confidence in dealing with union officials became stronger. My confidence grew. And so initially, yes, frightened, but I think it's a matter of realizing you're having a conversation with another person, like you would with another manager or perhaps a director. Just see them as a human, but allow them to open the door of conversation and listen first, then
That
respond.
sounds like some advice someone gave me a long time ago. We have two ears and one mouth, so we need to listen twice as much as we talk. And I must confess that's something I'm still learning to do. So, um, Helen, it's been absolutely great having you on here. It's despite having worked with HR people for such a long time, I've learned even more by this conversation, and I'm sure that the viewers and audience will have picked up quite a few tips and got a good insight into what it means to be an HR professional, because it is a profession. It's a huge field, and it takes some time to hone your skills in that area. So thank you very much for all the value you've brought to our listeners today. If we can, just finish off by getting your contact details, your websites, and anything else you'd like to say about your business. I'll take that down and put it all on the screen later. Just want you to give it to them yourself.
Yes. Thank you, Mark, firstly, for inviting me. And I'm pleased. I hope that everyone has found some value in our discussion today. So, yes, my contact details are I have a mobile, and that would be +27 for South Africa, 082 716 7597. My email address is Helen with one L at pplsolutions.co.za. My website is www.pplsolutions.co.za, and that should be going live in a week's time. So if you go onto it today, I don't think you're going to get much. You'll probably get the message to say it's under revamp.
Yeah.
And yes, then I have a LinkedIn profile as well, which I could let you have.
Yep.
All right. So that would be https://linkedin.com/Helen-Will-136AB653. Thank you, Mark.
Excellent, Helen. Thank you once again. So for everyone watching this, I'm getting quite good at not forgetting to do this. Please like, share, and subscribe this video. It's all aimed at helping small businesses. We're all one community, and it doesn't matter what part of the country in the UK you're from or what part of the world you are in. As you can see, Helen is from South Africa. In general, small businesses are the backbone of any economy because they provide the jobs for, at entry level people coming out of school and university. They provide valuable training, and almost 90, if not more than 90% of the economy in most countries comes from small businesses. So we know we've got some tough times coming up in the UK, as promised by our Prime Minister. And this is part of an initiative to help small businesses in advance to, get the word out there that they exist. Let people know what services they offer. And I encourage you all to please support small businesses wherever you are in whatever part of the world. So thank you for listening. And all your likes, shares, and subscribes will help towards that. Helen, thank you for joining us. And please stay on the line. We'll have a chat after this. Thanks, everyone.
Mark,
And we'll see you in the next one.
thank you.